Hello. For those of you who subscribe to my channel, you probably know who I am. Many of you have come via 60 Symbols. Thank you for subscribing, first of all. However, this video is going to be mirrored at a number of different other channels, so it's probably best if I introduce myself. So my name is Philip Moriarty. I'm a Professor of Physics at the University of Nottingham. Yes, for the Sherlock Holmes fans amongst you, it is indeed Professor Moriarty. I'm involved in research, teaching, admin at the university. On the research side, what we do in the group is we look at individual atoms, individual molecules, we move them around, we probe inside them, we measure the strength of single chemical bonds, we modify and manipulate single chemical bonds. What I usually do when I'm giving public lectures or speaking at events like Pint of Science or Skeptics in the Pub, for example, is I couch it in terms of, can we do 3D printing with atoms? We're nowhere near there, but the ultimate, I guess, goal of what we are planning to do is, can we computer program matter? Can we control the atomic building blocks of matter, bring them together and do chemistry under computer control? And there are a number of videos at the 60 Symbols channel which describe this, and I'll provide links for those down there. Why do I tell you that, and what has that got to do with the context of this video? Well, I think it's useful that you know my background in terms of the science that I do and the research that I do, but it's also useful that you know my background in terms of my other roles at the University of Nottingham. And this is largely a video in a personal context, but there are key aspects of this related to my role as admissions tutor, which means I oversee, along with a number of colleagues, applications to the School of Physics and Astronomy in terms of our various undergraduate degree courses, or BSc and or MSci degrees. And therefore I've got a particularly keen interest in thinking about aptitude and preferences for physics. Indeed, I've got a pretty keen interest in education in general, from primary through secondary up to tertiary level and beyond, in terms of what drives people's decisions, in terms of aptitudes, in terms of learning, in terms of what are the best ways to teach physics, what are the best ways to learn physics. So all those type of questions. So when assertions are made about the capability, the aptitude or the preference for physics, which aren't supported by evidence, I get a little bit peeved. So the core focus of this video is really a debate I've been having with, rather one-sided debate, it's got to be said, with somebody called Philip Mason. So Mason is a PhD chemist. He did his PhD at the University of Birmingham. His research is not that different, not that far removed from the type of work we do in Nottingham, in terms of looking at interactions of molecules, looking at dynamic structural properties of molecules. But it wasn't through his research that I became aware of Mason. I became aware of him, like many of you might have, through his YouTube channel, for which he goes under the moniker of Thunderfoot. For reasons I'll describe at the end of this video, I'm going to refer to him by his given name, which is Philip Mason, throughout this video. So in those videos, at his YouTube channel, Mason has spent a great deal of time arguing, quite laudably and quite correctly, that really, if we're going to make assertions, that we really have to back those assertions up with evidence. Indeed, he has, rather self-importantly, it must be said, decided to coin the acronym PEARL for physical evidence and reason logic, and indeed has described himself as a Pearlist. So you would think that Mason would be very keen to back up his arguments with strong evidence. If he's making assertions, if he's making points, that given that he's a Pearlist, he would use reasoned logic and use evidence to develop his arguments. So how does this connect with aptitude preference for physics? What has Mason got to do with that? Well, Mason and I were on an episode of the Magic Sandwich Show, a podcast, about a year ago, roughly a year ago. And a number of things we were discussing, but one of the topics we got onto was the gender balance in physics. Now, the gender balance in physics is tilted very heavily towards males. It's roughly 80-20. And it's interesting to think about why that might be. For example, in maths, the gender balance is much closer to 50-50. And Mason made the quite remarkable assertion that that gender balance in those figures are dominated by what he calls, what many call, sexual dimorphism. And what that means is that it's a genetic, it's a biological thing, and that's why the gender balance is tipped so heavily towards males. Now this is a remarkable assertion, and I asked Mason to provide evidence for that. Now on the show he couldn't provide it. And it's no use saying, and this is in effect Mason's argument, it's no use saying, well, men are obviously different from women, therefore sexual dimorphism, therefore gender balance in physics. That is a pitifully poor argument. That's an argument that's as poor as, well, look at the eye, look at how complex the eye is. Surely that must have been made by an intelligent designer. How could you not believe that? It's at that level, the argument is. And given that Mason has spent so much of his time, made a whole series of videos with the title of the series is Why People Laugh at Creationists, spent so much time focusing on evidence, it was wholly disappointing that he couldn't provide this evidence. So that was a Magic Sandwich Show, various other fora on the internet, he's made these claims. So I wrote a blog post. I sent Mason an email to say, look, blog post is online, be good if you could comment on it. Response, there came none. So then Christy Winters, quite kindly, also picked up on the blog post. I sent her a link and she did a short video on it, and that picked, I also sent Mason a link to that. That's rather more recently. And I was quite keen to revisit this and debate this topic again with Mason. And so accompanying this video is a blog post, and I'll obviously provide a link to that blog post down there. Please read the blog post. So I don't want to make this video too long, and it's really just a trailer for the blog post, but there are a few peripheral points that I'd like to pick up on that have stemmed from this rather one-sided exchange with Mason. The first of these is language. There's no point arguing that you're putting across reasoned, rational, logical, scientific viewpoints when your language, your discourse is sub that you'd expect, or I'd expect, or anyone would expect, from a 10-year-old, and a 10-year-old with a particularly weak reading level at that. The level of discourse that just the standard of the emails I received from Mason in terms of just how they were constructed, the poor grammar, the childish, immature retorts, that's really disappointing, really disappointing for anyone on the internet, let alone somebody who claims to be, I'll say it again, a pluralist. That's the first thing. So communication is the first thing. Second thing is this whole pseudonym nonsense. I just find it ridiculous that a man who's like me, is in his 40s, has to hide behind a pseudonym, and yet at the same time complains about professional victims, at the same time complains about safe spaces. That's a level of hypocrisy that is just remarkable. And finally, back to this whole aptitude preference for physics and sexual dimorphism thing. And for those of you who would argue that obviously, this sexual dimorphism aspect, the genetics, the biology, outweighs the environmental considerations, consider this. At the moment in the UK, certainly in 2015, in terms of the gender balance of those going to university, it's tipped very heavily in favour of females, actually a 9.2% difference, according to a very recent report. Now, you're going to argue that that's a sexual dimorphism thing, that males are just not as well equipped as females to go to university, or are you going to argue that there may well be an environmental aspect of this? And if you're going to argue that there's going to be an environmental aspect in that case, why do you then dismiss the environmental aspect when it comes to preference, aptitude for physics? I hope that some of you responding to this video can do a better job than Mason in terms of addressing my comments. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you.